Hi everyone, welcome back. So in the last video, we learned how to run containers, check running containers with Docker PS, stop them, remove them, and understand that containers are temporary and disposable. And we also learned how to forcefully remove them, how to forcefully stop the containers with zeros by adding zero at the end, right? Now, there's one more situation that we usually encounter when we are working with Docker or containers, which is running a container is useful, but what if the container is running a website or API and we want to access it from our own computer, right? So in this case, port binding comes in. So the thing is that a container can run a web server internally, but by default, that server is isolated and not accessible from the browser. Like we cannot access that web server from our own, like when we open Google Chrome or any browser, right? So what Docker does is Docker solves this issue using port mapping. For example, what we can do is if we, for example, run Docker run nginx, which I told you is a web server, right? We run this. Now this, it returns a container ID, so which means our this Docker run successfully ran, right? So we ran this. Now this starts this web server in the background. But if you try to open localhost in the browser, like localhost at the particular port number, it will not work still, right? And the reason it will not work is because container's internal port is not connected to our computer yet. I mean, let's say our Google Chrome browser or any browser you're using is not connected to this container. So we need to find a way and to connect, and we need to map that at a particular port, right? To make it accessible, we need to use the -p. We need to add this to our command. So what we can do is docker run -d for detach. That is, as I told before, that it will detach the terminal and the Docker, right? And then we can add the port, which is 8080 in the case of containers, and 80 nginx, right? Now, before we run this, we need to understand this carefully, that what are we doing over here. So there's a particular format. You are now aware of this Docker run. You also know what does -d means, that is detach, and this is a particular port. So now this port, this 8080 is the port on our computer, right? And this 80 is the port inside the container, right? And what is a container? This is a container that we ran when we run this first command. So there's a particular format that is inside. So outside is our container, our machine, and inside is the container port, right? So we map it like this: outside colon inside. Now if we run this, oh, it's oh sorry, I think it is a problem. Okay, let's figure it out. Oh, sorry, yeah, I figured it out because the port I was using to run and to map the container and my browser, that particular port was already in use. So what we're going to do is, so we can do docker run detach, and the name of the port is, so I'm not going to use 8080 again, I'm going to use 8083, right? And this and nginx, right? So now we have this, we are successful in doing this. So what this means is, so now if we, so now as I explained before, this command maps is able to connect our web browser and the container, right? And the web browser and the server is nginx is running within the container. So and also one more thing to keep in mind is the format. The port 8080 is the outside colon, the inside ports, and the outside port is our browser and inside is our container port, right? So now if we go to this if we go to this our web browser and type in, yeah. So now if I go to our web browser with and type in 8383, so you see now this server, this web server is successfully running. And on top of this, we can now also check while with using Docker PS that whether this container is running or not. You see, so the latest one that we created was this one, BE5. We can also verify from this. This is the BE5 and this is the BE5. There are other containers running as well with the on the same server, but this is the one we created. So this is how we map our browser and the container within the Docker. Cool. So that was pretty much it for this lesson. I'm just going to summarize this. So in this video, we learned that containers are isolated by default. So applications inside them are not automatically accessible from our browser or from our computer. Now to give them the access, we use port mapping, which we just did with using the -p right option. We also learned that the most important format outside port and colon inside port. For example, outside port was 8080 and the container port was 80. And before you run, the mistake that I did was you have to make sure that there is no any other server or anything else running using the same port. So if something else is running on the same port, you need to either remove that server from that port or use some other port, right? And this is how we access websites, API, dashboards, and other services running inside the Docker containers. See you in the next lesson.